I'm Jarrett Carpenter, and this is More Than Blockchain. Welcome back to the show. I have taken quite the little hiatus since going to Bitcoin Nashville. I have had a lot of stuff going on in my personal life and in my professional life, and I have not had the time to dedicate to this podcast. And that is on me. But I am back, and I'm going to talk about something that I'm going to continue to talk about on this podcast, which is the idea that 0.1 Bitcoin is a lot. More specifically, 0.1 Bitcoin is generational wealth. Now, that may sound absolutely crazy to you, but today I kind of want to break down this from a 30,000 foot view. And in another episode, I actually have some charts I'd like to show you. So make sure you subscribe and stay tuned to what I'm going to talk about, because I think that this is a really big deal. Bitcoin right now is sitting around $60,000. So in order to get 0.1 or a tenth of a Bitcoin, it's about $6,000. And I think $6,000 to put into something to then have generational wealth on the other side is a pretty big deal. There are not too many other things, if anything, that you can kind of put into right now with $6,000 and be like, when my child, who's maybe 2 years old now, is 24 years old or 44 years old or 64 years old, they're going to be like, wow, thanks so much, Dad, for putting in that work when I was younger to be able to provide me with something that I'm going to be able to pass down to my children. And I think you can do that right now for $6,000, which is 0.1 Bitcoin. Now, I originally talked about this idea back in February of 2022, that the idea of 0.1 Bitcoin is a lot. If you're interested, you can go watch that video. I'll probably put the link up here. That's been the most viral video. I think it really resonated with people, that idea that 0.1 Bitcoin is generational wealth. Now, at that time, Bitcoin was around $17,000 when I had published that video in February of 2022. So at that point, generational wealth was only $1,700. Today, it's $6,000, which is almost, quadrupled, definitely 3x and a little bit more. Where I think Bitcoin is going, I think that this idea is only going to hold true. Now, being at Bitcoin Nashville, I had the unbelievable privilege of seeing Michael Saylor speak. And if you have not seen him speak and his keynote, you need to watch. It's about 37 minutes of masterclass. And I'm going to leave that link in the description. But one of the things that he said was that by 2045, Bitcoin is going to take up such a large part of assets in the world that his bearish case, or, his most least likely to happen, or not least likely to happen, but his bearish case is like, yeah, it's going to work out, but it's not going to work out like we all want it to, or like maybe it should work out, right? It was ceteris paribus, all things considered equal. He says it will be $3 million a coin. His base case is $13 million a coin. And then his bullish case is, if everything works out the way it should, is $45 million a coin. And that's only by 2045. And I'm going to make sure I put that slide up on the screen so you can see it. If you're listening to this on a podcast platform, you might want to go over to YouTube to kind of check out what that looks like. Now, in that circumstance, you will be taking $6,000 today. And if it were to go to 13 million by 2045, that 1/10 of a Bitcoin, which I've called generational wealth, will then be worth $1.3 million. Now, it's really hard to tell what's going to probably happen into the future with currencies. There's hundreds of currencies around the world, like 160 currencies, I think Lynn Alden just said in her video about money. In the future, I do think that there's only going to be like 6 or 7 currencies. Basically, currencies from emerging markets or developing nations, they're all going to dollarize. They're going to turn into the euro. They're going to turn into the yen or the yuan. They're going to turn into Bitcoin, maybe even a USDC, some type of stablecoin, or people are just going to honestly adopt a Bitcoin standard throughout their country. Now, until we get to that point, though, there is a tons of currencies. And one of the things that I've talked about on a video here before is the importance of earning a currency, spending a currency, and saving in a different currency, making sure that those are all 3 different. Now, I currently make US dollars, I spend Colombian pesos, and I save in Bitcoin. So in the future, this is why I say that this is generational wealth. Because if we go to Michael Saylor's base case, which is 13 million, and if you spend $6,000 right now to get 1/10 of a Bitcoin, and you hold it through 2045 because you're going to give it to someone else in your family, aka generational wealth, and ask them to hold on to it, that will be worth $1.3 million. Now, the reason why I talked about the world currencies is because it's going to be interesting to see where those currencies go. Because right now, even with like $250,000, $200,000, $100,000, in many countries in the world, if you have that in dollars, $100,000, $150,000, which up in Massachusetts, where I'm currently recording, is not a lot of money because most homes are going to be worth $1 million in the next 5 years due to inflation and currency debasement. However, If you have $100,000 to $150,000 and you're in Colombia, the peso is losing value against the dollar. Therefore, that dollar is continuing to be worth more. It is just continuing to be able to buy you more. Its purchasing power is moving up. So this is why I think that even with $100,000 to $150,000 now, like I said, like in Massachusetts, it may not move the meter if you're trying to buy a house or you're trying to do anything. You're just trying to live off that for a while. In the future, you will be able to, and even now, you can take that 100, 150 and go to Colombia, and you could honestly probably live for 10 years if you budgeted right, easily just off that money. And as the peso devalues against the dollar, maybe it's 10 years, then maybe it turns into 12 or 15 years. The same exact thing is going to happen with Bitcoin, and this is why I think it's generational wealth. If you think about just in this small example, the Colombian peso to the dollar, the peso is going to continue to lose value to the dollar. And then if we shift this over, and you really need to see the visual I'm trying to create, Bitcoin is up here. As the peso loses to the dollar, both are losing to Bitcoin, which is increasing. This is where I think people are going to be able to retire for sure off a half a Bitcoin or a quarter of a Bitcoin in the next 15 years. And why 0.1 Bitcoin, which right now is on sale for $6,000, you're going to be able to pass down to your child. And if it hits Michael Saylor's base case, which we've kind of talked about here, it will be worth $1.3 million. And you'll be able to take that $1.3 million and probably live in 95% of the UN recognized countries in the world. And that person will be able to buy land. They will be able to do a whole host of things with just that 1/10 of a Bitcoin. Remember, each Bitcoin breaks down to 100 million pieces. So that one Bitcoin will be worth 10 million sats. And I could see a world where at 13 million per Bitcoin or 1.3 million for that 10th, obviously we're not at sat dollar parity, but we're getting kind of close. So I could see a world where, you're going to buy a home for 1/100th of a Bitcoin. And then they would still have 9/10 of a Bitcoin left to go. And the idea would be that even if they started to spend that, obviously in a budgeted manner, they may be able to spend that Bitcoin into the future because that Bitcoin will always be worth more than the local currency. Whether Colombia, in the Colombian example, whether the Colombia decides to dollarize or they decide to continue with a peso if it even exists that long and doesn't hyperinflate into oblivion. Point being, my personal opinion is everyone should be trying to find a way to get to 0.1 Bitcoin. Right now, it's around $6,000. That means that if that price were to stay the same, you would just need to invest $500 a month into that. And when I talk to millennials about retirement and investing, this is one of the things I really hit on. Is there anything else right now that is going to give you potentially that peace of mind and that ROI for $6,000? Most people put $6,000 into their Roth or into their 401ks or their matching programs every year, if not a lot more. And they never see that type of ROI or that type of peace of mind out on the other side. So here we are. The world is moving fast. At the Bitcoin conference, we had 2 out of the 3 political parties represented. The independents by RFK, Donald Trump, with the Republicans. Harris campaign did not show up, but you have 66% of the political parties in the United States saying Bitcoin is something we want to invest in. You have the biggest hedge funds and the biggest institutional money coming into it. You have banks starting to hold it on their balance sheet. The wealthy are starting to use it. People are starting to sell a lot of their real estate portfolios to put it into Bitcoin. It is something that is going to continue to grow. And my feeling, as I've always said, is that 0.1 Bitcoin is going to be generational wealth. So please share this with a friend, a family member, or colleague that maybe is on this fence about Bitcoin being something worthwhile. Because for $6,000, which for many people is like 2 mortgage payments back to back, if you can get that money together, get 1/10 of a Bitcoin. You need to figure out your storage, right? You don't want to leave it on exchange. So you need to understand cold storage. But that may be something that you just kind of set aside. If you have young kids, take that $6,000, put it into 0.1 Bitcoin, set it aside. I've said it on this podcast before, but I have 1/10 of a Bitcoin set aside for my nephew. So when he's 18 or 25, I haven't really decided. 18 may be too young to ideally give him that much power, but maybe when he's 25. I will give this to him and say, hey, go ahead. Because by the time he's 25, if Michael Saylor's right, Bitcoin may be worth more than $13 million. If you enjoyed this episode, please go ahead and subscribe. If you're watching this on YouTube, subscribe. If you're watching this or if you're listening to this on a podcast platform, Be sure to follow us on social media at More Than Blockchain. We're on most social media networks. If you have any questions, definitely DM us on Instagram at More Than Blockchain. Thank you so much for checking out this episode, and I'll see you next time.